What's up, kings and queens? It's your boy Dan from Daft Previews, back here once again for another comprehensive player prop preview for all 6 games on this upcoming slate. We killed it in our last video. We went 5-2, another 5.3 units profit. That means over 12 units profit in the last 2 days, and all that analysis was done on these videos. So if you haven't already, sub to the channel because I'm doing this every single day. So in this video, I'll be taking you through all the key matchups. We'll go through their form. We'll go through prop lines. We'll talk about good matchups, bad matchups. And I do all this to give you all the information that you need to make informed decisions before you put your bets on. So I'll be using outlier.bet to sort through all of this data. And if you're interested in doing the same, I've got a 7-day free trial, and the link for that is in the description box below. Now let's go! So we're kicking things off with the Oklahoma City Thunder versus the Orlando Magic. Jumping straight into it. We'll kick it off with SGA. Looking at his points prop, his line is at 31.5. We can see that in terms of the matchup, the Orlando Magic allow the 7th fewest points to point guards on the season. Now, SGA has covered this line in 4 out of his last 10 games. Against the Orlando Magic, he's covered this in 3 consecutive games. So, difficult matchup, but SGA has turned it on against the Magic in the past. Is a road game for OKC. So, breaking things down by his last 10 road games, we can see that he's only covered this in 2 out of his last 10. So, his recent form isn't great covering this line, especially on the road, but he has got it done against the Orlando Magic in the past, covering in 3 straight games. Have a look at his assist prop. The line for that is 6.5. The Magic allow the 4th fewest assists to point guards. He's covered this line in 6 out of his last 10 games. In 3 head-to-head matchups against the Magic, he's covered this in 1 out of his last 3. Good news is, if you do like the over, he did get 7 assists in their last matchup in January this year. And looking into his rebound prop, his line for that is 5.5. You can get that for plus money. But the Magic, they allow the 2nd fewest rebounds to point guards. He's covered this in 1 out of his last 3 games against the Magic. And looking at his last 10, he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. So for a lot of star players like SGA, the matchup is difficult and the form's all over the place. I tend to avoid them purely because the line for these guys is super high. If anything, for star players like SGA, I'd probably look at it under. Even he's performed quite well scoring against the Orlando Magic in the past. I'm not man enough to take the under right now. But with 6 games, a lot of props, I'm sure we can find a few winners on here. But SGA, not a player that I'm willing to touch for this game. Let's have a look at J-Dub, Jalen Williams. So his points line is at 18.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. He's just scored 32 points against the Sacramento Kings. In terms of the matchup, the Magic allow the 3rd fewest points to power forwards on the season. Looking at how he's played against the Magic, he's gone under in 3 consecutive games. Earlier this year in January, he scored 16 points in that game. So, yeah, J-W's hurt my feelings quite a few times this season. For the most part, he's been playing well, but every now and then, he just puts up a stinker, and I just happen to be betting on him. Quick little deep dive. That game earlier this year where he scored 16 points, he played 33 minutes, so minutes weren't the issue. He shot the ball 16 times, so shot attempts were not the issue, but he only shot 44% from the field, from 3 from downtown. So he had the volume. It was really down to shot percentage, which let him down. So I'm not super keen given how difficult the matchup is going to be. But look, it's a difficult matchup for most players here because given the Orlando Magic are a great defensive team, his recent form is undeniable. It's excellent, right? 7 out of his last 10. If you want to look at how he's performed on the road, we can see he's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games on the road. So if you're just looking at form, I don't mind it. That recent matchup against the Orlando Magic was about a month ago. Didn't shoot well. All he needed was to shoot a little bit better. The shot attempts are definitely there. So if he's going to get amongst it, I think there's a good chance that he goes over, but I'm not really feeling J-Dub in this one. Looking at his assist prop, though, his line's at 4.5. The Magic do allow the 3rd fewest assists to power forwards. He has hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games, though. Had 9 assists against the Sacramento Kings. And head-to-head matchups against the Magic, he's gone under in all 3 games. So points-wise, he struggled. Assist-wise, he's clearly struggled. Looking at his last 10 games on the road, he's covered this in 8 out of his last 10. So the question is, how much stock are you going to put into that last matchup against the Orlando Magic? Does he continue to go under, or is this the game where he really busts it wide open and he breaks the trend? So recent form is great. Form against the Magic, not so much. Looking at his rebound prop, I wonder if we'll see the same thing. His line's at 4.5. You can get that at plus money. He's only covered this in 4 out of his last 10. The Magic allow the 7th fewest rebounds to power forwards on the season. 3 games against the Orlando Magic. He did go over in his most recent one with 6 boards. So having a quick look at his PRA, we can see his form for the most part recently. It's been quite good. So he's gotten under his PRA of 27.5 in 3 straight games. The main one I'd really focus on is the one in January, because this is where he's taken a leap. In that game, 16 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists. Definitely playing a lot better than that at this current moment. But in terms of PRA, he's only covered that in 4 out of his last 10 games. So, look, given the difficulty of the matchup and his recent form and how he's gone against them, I'm not feeling J-Dub in this one. But someone I think who does have potential here is Chet Holmgren. So I just want to find my man, Chet. Where is he? Here he is. All right. So we're not going to look at an under on his points. Let's just look at the over. Make this a little bit easier for me. All right. So the Orlando Magic allow the 13th fewest points to centers, which, you know, seems like a probably more difficult matchup. But given they're probably top 5, top 10 defending all the other positions, the center spot is the weak spot for them. So his line's at 14.5. He has covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. It's the Orlando Magic. I think he's only played them once. He scored 15 points. So he did cover this line. He played 31 minutes and he shot the ball 14 times. Looking at his last 10, we can see he's playing 29.6 minutes, shooting the ball on average 11.7 times. So the matchup is, you know, somewhat difficult, but he does have probably the easiest matchup for all of the OKC Thunder players. But given he's not getting the volume, I would be quite hesitant to bet on Chet at the moment. So that's a hard pass for me. Let's have a look at his rebound line. That's at 7.5. The Magic allow the 13th fewest rebounds to centers. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. He did have 8 rebounds in his last game against the Orlando Magic. But Chet Holmgren, his rebound numbers are very inconsistent, not something that I'd be confident to take. I want to have a look at his blocks prop. The reason why is Wemby just got 10 blocks today. Chet Holmgren, does he respond with a massive game, getting some blocks? I'm not sure. But looking at his last 10, he's covered his line of 2.5 blocks, which is at plus money, in 5 out of his last 10 games. The last matchup against the Magic, he only had 2 blocks. So nothing screaming out to me there. Look, the only reason I would take this purely is because Wemby just did it. Does Chet go out there and do something similar? 5 to 7 blocks. We know that he's capable of that. The Magic do allow the 17th fewest blocks in the league, which is pretty mid. Overall, 10th fewest blocks. So they do block some. The centers do only get some blocks, but for the most part, the Magic don't get blocked that often. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not feeling an omen play for him, but I'm just saying it could happen. I'm going to look at some Orlando Magic players now. Let's have a look at Banchero. So points prop. His line's at 22.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. Banchero, in terms of the matchup, OKC allow the 8th fewest points to power forwards on the season. Banchero has covered this in 1 of his last 3 games against OKC. So I haven't been feeling his points prop for quite some time, to be honest, and I'm not feeling it today. The matchup is somewhat difficult. He's gone under against them in the past. So not feeling that, but assist prop. He's been passing the ball extremely well. Now, his line is still at 5.5. Now, he's covered this in 10 straight games, which is crazy. When he first started this run, his line was at 3.5. It slowly moved its way up to 5.5. Now it's 5.5 minus 129. So they're starting to apply a little bit of juice here. Now, the OKC Thunder, they allow the 10th fewest assists to power forwards on the season. Banchero, look at that. Last 3 games against OKC, 2, 7, and then 8 assists in their last matchup. So, look, this is quite impressive. 14 of his last 20 games, but he's hit this in 10 straight, which is pretty wild. So an important stat to look up is his potential assists over this span. Make sure you're taking that into consideration. But look, if he's done it in 10 consecutive games, it's not a real fluke. Something has changed within their offense, and Banchero is obviously doing some more creating on the offensive end. I don't mind it. 129, I probably wouldn't. I'd take this if it was closer to 110, which is $1.90 here in Australia. But do your line shopping, and if you can find it for great odds, yeah, it's definitely a good play. But looking at his rebound prop, I've never bet on a Banchero rebound prop because look at the shit he does. 3 out of his last 10. The matchup is good. The OKC Thunder allow the 8th most rebounds to power forwards, but this guy is inconsistent as hell when it comes to getting boards. But he has rebounded well against OKC. Check that out. 8, 8, and 9 rebounds. So given that, would you consider taking a rebound plus assist line for Banchero? Obviously, he's going to get the assist. Rebounds, he's somewhat inconsistent. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10, but he's cleared this quite easily. Average getting 15 and 17 in his last 2 games against the OKC Thunder. So, yeah, you probably have to do the math to weigh it up. Doesn't make sense. 12.5 is what you need. So you need 6 assists and 7 rebounds. So you're getting a bit of a discount there. His line is 7.5 if you just take his boards, and his assists are obviously at 6. But you can get his boards at plus money. That's a thing. So, yeah, look, I'm a little bit hesitant. Probably require a bit more research. But Banchero, I'm sure he covers one of these props, rebounds or assists. I don't see him going under in everything. Points, I'm a little bit unsure of. But, yeah, definitely one to consider. Let's check out Wendell Carter Jr. His points line's at 10.5. The matchup with OKC is okay. 14th most points to centers on the season. His points line is hitting 6 of his last 10, but he has, what are we looking at? He scored 30 and 13 points. Sorry, I've got this on the under. That's not good. That's not what we want. Check the over. All right, he's hit this in both of his games against OKC, and he's hit this in only 4 out of his last 10 games. My apologies. Looking at his rebound prop, we know Chet's not the greatest rebounder in this league. The OKC Thunder allow the 5th most rebounds to centers on the season. Now, his line's at 7.5. You can get that at plus money, but he's only hit this in 4 out of his last 10. He's gone under in 4 straight games. The San Antonio Spurs, one of the easiest matchups for rebounds for centers, and he only got 6. So, yeah, I can't trust him at this rate. He did have 12 and 13 rebounds the last time he played OKC, but both of these games were last season, so I wouldn't put too much stock into that. But that's Wendell for you. Want to see if I can find Franz. Is Franz playing in this one? Yes, he is. Okay. So having a look at Franz. His line is at 21.5 points. In terms of the matchup, the OKC Thunder allow the least points to small forwards on the season. Now, Franz has hit this in 3 out of his last 10 games. In those games, he absolutely exploded. 38, 34, and 36 points. Outside of that, going well under this line. Head-to-head matchups. He's only played OKC once. This was last season, and he did score 20 points. So, yeah, I'm not sure. Look, he does have the most difficult matchup a small forward's going to find tomorrow. But his recent form is pretty horny, I've got to tell you. 34, 36, and then would you take him under 21.5? I'm not too sure. Let's have a look at his field goal attempts. 17 and 22 shots in those last 2 games. He's actually been shooting the ball quite a lot over his last 5. So, yeah, if he's going to take 17 to 18 shot attempts, 21.5, yeah, probably lean to the over, but the matchup is difficult. Looking at his assists, very similar to Banchero. He's been hitting his number quite often. His line is at 3.5, so that hasn't moved, but it is juiced to the gills. Minus 165. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. Had 7 assists in his last matchup against OKC. But the OKC, they allow the least assists to small forwards. So, yeah, look, difficult matchup, but he has been performing quite well. Young Franz. Rebounds, his line's at 5.5. The Thunder allow the 3rd fewest rebounds to small forwards. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 and only had 1 rebound in his last matchup against OKC. Quickly scanning the board to see if there's anybody else I want to go through. Josh Giddey, he's not worth betting on these days. He's inconsistent as hell. Suggs, he sucks. Dort, he ain't doing too much. So let's jump into the very next game. We're looking at the Boston Celtics versus the Brooklyn Nets. Now, I had a quick scan of this game earlier, and there's a few, I think there's at least one pick that I do like, others that I'm a bit hesitant on, but let's get through them. We'll start with the Boston Celtics. We'll start with Drew Holiday, actually. Let's have a look at him. So his points line is at 13.5. So we just cashed on our last play on Drew Holiday. We took him for 15 points, even though his line was at 12.5. Cash that. Very positive in terms of profit, which is great. Looking at his points, he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. In head-to-head matchups against the Brooklyn Nets, he scored 18 and 13 points. His line normally sits at 12.5, but we see that increase to 13.5. The matchup is pretty good. The Nets don't defend point guards quite well. They allow the 6th most points to point guards on this season. But this line at 13.5, it might be just about right. There's enough there to make me real hesitant, not willing to get on that one. So I think I'll pass on betting on the Drew Holiday points. But let's have a look at his rebounds and assists, because we know that he can fill it up. Assist-wise, 5 out of his last 10 he's covered this line. The Nets allow the 6th fewest assists to point guards on the season. Did have 10 and 9 assists in his last 2 games against the Brooklyn Nets. So he has had some success against them despite the difficult matchup. But looking at his assists, the one thing that I was very close to betting on at the moment was this. Looking at his first quarter assist. So the line is at 1.5, and you can get this for plus 155. For us here in Australia, I think it was about $2.50 I saw it. And it's for Drew Holiday to get 2 assists. He's hit this in 5 consecutive games now. And in his last 20 games, he's only hit this in 8 of the last 20. But this last 5, this recent form, is pretty juicy, I've got to say. Now, in head-to-head matchups against the Nets, he's hit this in his last 2. He had 3 assists in the first quarter the last time they played, and he only played 7.5 minutes in that game. Now, looking at his last 5, where he's been covering this quite well, he's playing 8 minutes on average. So if he's going to play 8 minutes, I don't mind it. Like, he's hit this in 5 consecutive games. He's hit it against Brooklyn in the past, and you're getting it for plus money. So the odds for this are great. I'm still a bit on the fence about it. Let me know in the comment section if there's something you choose to get on. I wanted to share that with you because I'm a little bit hesitant at the moment, but I think it's a great pick, especially because it's plus money. Looking at his rebound prop, line's at 4.5. The matchup, Nets, they're mid-tier, 16th. Looking at his last 10, he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. And against the Brooklyn Nets, he's killed it. 9 and 12 rebounds. So we did take him for over rebounds and assists in his last game against Miami. But I think that's because the matchup was good and the historical form was great. Against Brooklyn, it's only 2 games, so we don't have a real large sample size. I can't say that Drew Holiday, he gets it done against the Brooklyn Nets. I can't take his rebounds and assists with that much confidence because I'd like to see a larger sample size. But yeah, I think best pick for Drew Holiday going through my mind at the moment is those first quarter assists. I don't mind that at plus money. As always, check the pinned comment, and that's where you'll see my final picks. If you do choose to follow what I'm doing, but I do encourage you guys, do your own research, find your own picks, use Outlier if you need to, and play with it because there's so many props, there's so many players. I'm going to miss something. But yeah, anyway, let's get into this. So Jaylen Brown, his points prop, it's at 20.5. The Brooklyn Nets allow the 3rd most points to small forwards, so he's got a great matchup. In his last 10 games, he's only covered this in 3 out of his last 10. So he does have an excellent matchup, but Jaylen Brown has been stinky, like old socks. He hasn't been hitting this line at all. Head-to-head matchups, look at this. He's hit this in 5 consecutive games against the Brooklyn Nets. 34, 26, 35, 23, 28. So he's got a good sample size of games against the Brooklyn Nets, but his recent form sucks. But here's a pick. I already looked into this one. I've already put my bet on for this one, so I'm going to share it with you. I'm taking him over 5.5 points in the first quarter. So not only has he hit this in 5 consecutive games against the Brooklyn Nets, in his last 10 games, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. He's covered in 5 straight games. So even though he's only covered his full line in 3 out of his last 10, because he's been a little bit doo-doo in the first quarter, Jaylen Brown's been getting busy. So he just needs 3 shots at least. It could be 2. If he's getting 2 3-pointers, you've got free throws to really consider. And the one thing I love about this is he's playing close to 10 minutes in the first quarter. So he's going to definitely have some touches. Porzingis and Jaylen Brown, they do a lot of first quarter scoring for the Boston Celtics. Drew Holiday does not. Jason Tatum, he picks and chooses when he gets involved. So it's really Jaylen Brown and Porzingis they go to early. We know Jaylen Brown's got a good matchup. Line shop, see what the best odds you can get for that are. But Jaylen Brown first quarter points, I do like. Looking at his rebound prop, he's lines at 5.5. It's juiced to the gills, minus 148 though. He's hit this in 8 out of his last 10 games. The Brooklyn Nets allow the most rebounds to small forwards. He's got an excellent matchup. In head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in 4 straight games against the Brooklyn Nets, though. So that makes me a little bit cautious. I do like to see the greens all over the place. That gives me a little bit more confidence. But the matchup is good. He hasn't done it well against the Nets before, but he has been doing it well over his last 10 games. So I'll leave that up to you to make that decision. Another player we're going to jump through is Jason Tatum. His points prop, let's have a look. It's 28.5. Some places have it at 29.5 at plus money, right? So looking at his last 10, he's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup against the Brooklyn Nets, who allow the fewest points to power forwards this season. Head-to-head matchups, he's been quite inconsistent. He's hit this in 2 out of his last 6. Scored 23 points in his last matchup against the Brooklyn Nets. In that game, he played 33 minutes. He still took 17 shots, just didn't shoot very well. Now, my biggest problem with Jason Tatum is he's got all the talent, skills in the world. They want him to be the poster child of American basketball, but his decision-making is awful. He just takes such bad shots all the time. Now, for him to shoot, he's shooting 50% from the field, 37% from deep, 91% from free throws in his last 10. Problem with me is he doesn't take enough layups. He doesn't get to the rim, takes these difficult fadeaways when he doesn't need to. He's inconsistent when it comes to scoring. The matchup is difficult. I'm leaning to the under here for Jason Tatum, 29.5. That seems quite a lot for a team that allows the fewest points to power forwards this season. But yeah, definitely a lean on the under. I did take a play on Jason Tatum recently to go over in his assists, and he absolutely murdered it. I think his line for this game was 4.5 against Miami, and I got that at plus money. So looking at the matchup here, the Brooklyn Nets allow the 3rd fewest assists to power forwards. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10, but he's hit it in 4 straight. Head-to-head matchups against Brooklyn, he's gone under in every single game, young Tatum. So look, how much stock are you going to put into his recent form? That is up to you. For me, I'm just choosing not to play JT in this one. Rebound-wise, his line's at 9.5. You can get that at plus money. He's hit this in 2 out of his last 5 games. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Against the Brooklyn Nets, he's rebounded extremely well. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 6 games against the Brooklyn Nets. They do allow the 12th fewest rebounds in the league, the Nets. Looking at his last 10 away games, how's he been rebounding the ball? 5 out of his last 10. So, yeah, it's pretty split down the middle. But look, at 9.5 for plus money, knowing that he's hit this in 3 consecutive away games against the Brooklyn Nets, might be something that I can fuck with. So I'm pretty selective when it comes to choosing my bets these days. One thing that plays a big part in me being so selective is the odds that are available. So at plus money, I might be willing to entertain it. He is inconsistent. The matchup is not the worst. He's done it against him in the past. So this one, I'm also on the fence about Jason Tatum. I want to look at Porzingis, and then we'll get into the Nets players. So Kristaps Porzingis, his points line is at 19.5. Matchup is a difficult one. The Brooklyn Nets allow the 3rd fewest points to centers on the season. Now, Kristaps is in great form at the moment. He's hit this in 4 straight. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. In head-to-head matchups against the Brooklyn Nets, scored 22 points against them last year, and then 9 points most recently. Actually, I'm a little bit confused. No, this was in November. So 22 and 9 in the 2 matchups against them. Yeah, the matchup's a little bit difficult, but his form is excellent, Kristaps Porzingis. They allow the fewest 3-pointers to centers as well. Nick Claxton, probably a more mobile center. He's not afraid to get up close to Porzingis. One thing I did want to look at, though, is his first quarter points. His line is 6.5. You can get that for plus money. He's hit that in 7 out of his last 10 games. He hit it in his last game. So in this game against the Nets, he scored 7 points in the first quarter. He scored 9 points in the whole game. So that's pretty wild. So they go to him early, and they don't go to him in the second half. But, yeah, I'm not feeling that. Still a little bit difficult for Kristaps. Looking at his rebound prop, 7 and 2 rebounds his last 2 matchups against the Nets. In his last 10, he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10, and the Nets allow the 7th fewest rebounds to centers. So, yeah, I'm not feeling Kristaps in this one up against Nick Claxton. Speaking of Nick Claxton, let's talk about him for a minute. His points prop is at 12.5. You can get that for plus money. Looking at the Boston Celtics, they're ranked 15th in terms of points allowed to centers, so they're right in the middle. Claxton's only hit this in 3 out of his last 10 games. And against the Boston Celtics, he's gone under in 4 consecutive games. So nothing very arousing going on here. But looking at his rebound prop, Nick Claxton, he's hit this line of 10.5 in 6 out of his last 10 games. The Celtics allow the 2nd fewest rebounds in the league. Head-to-head matchups, he's hit this in 2 out of his last 4. Did have 12 rebounds in his most recent matchup against the Boston Celtics. Yeah, nothing for Nick Claxton that I'm really loving there. Cam Thomas, let's have a look at him. So his points line's at 22.5. I want to look at the over here. Get that for minus 120. In terms of the matchup, Boston Celtics allow the 3rd fewest points to shooting guards. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And against the Boston Celtics, did score 27 points in their most recent matchup. Prior to probably got limited minutes and such. So it's difficult to look at historical form for somebody who's relatively new to the starting lineup. Cam Thomas is going to put up some shots, but it may not be an easy night for him. They don't have Spencer Dinwiddie anymore, but Ben Simmons is going to be playing point guard. So I think he'll find Cam Thomas, Bridges. He'll find some shooters. So I think there'll be some opportunity. I'm just not sure if Cam Thomas can make it happen. Let's have a look at Bridges, actually. His line is very similar to Cam Thomas. It's 22.5. And looking at that, he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Bridges lining up at the 3, where he does have a somewhat easier matchup. The Boston Celtics rank 16th, which is about middle of the league. In terms of head-to-head matchups, Bridges has struggled. He's gone under in his last 2. Did have a game against Boston where he scored 38 points, but yeah, look, this isn't screaming out to me either. Looking quickly at his assists, his line's at 3.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. And in his more recent matchups against Boston, had 1 in their most recent matchup, 4 and 4. So, yeah, nothing for the Brooklyn Nets is really screaming out to me. I've got to be honest with you. Dorian Finney-Smith, he doesn't excite me. Let's have a look at Ben Simmons. So I was considering taking his rebound prop in this one, but let's have a look at his points prop firstly. His line is at 5.5. He just came back from injury, I believe, against the Utah Jazz. So he's played 5 games now. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 5. Boston, they allow the 5th most points to point guards in the league. Now, I don't know if that's going to apply to Ben Simmons here, but the matchup part, that I guess it does make sense. Boston has struggled to defend point guards all year. You'd really have to look to see where they're giving up points. Is it from deep? Is it within the paint? So that makes me a little bit hesitant. He's normally a power forward. The Celtics allow the 2nd fewest points to power forward. So, yeah, I'm just a little bit hesitant. Ben Simmons doesn't take a lot of shots, so it could be a very sweaty bet, so I don't have too much confidence in that. But looking at his assists, he's hit this in 2 out of his last 5 games. The Celtics allow the 12th fewest assists to point guards and the 10th fewest assists to power forwards. So that could be a little bit difficult. Looking at his rebounds, though, that's at 6.5 or plus money. He's hit that in 3 straight, and then he had some shockers against Cleveland and the Spurs. Boston Celtics do allow the most rebounds to point guards, but and they allow the 10th most rebounds to power forwards. So rebound-wise, potentially I can fuck with that for Ben Simmons, but he wasn't very active against the Spurs and the Cavs, so that makes me a little bit cautious. In terms of his minutes, he probably play about 20 minutes a night. So, but look, it's only 6.5, right? So I can see him getting it, and if he does kill it, I'm going to kick myself because it is plus money. But yeah, I'm just a little bit uncertain because I don't understand why he rebounds so poorly in these 2 games. If I understood why the Cleveland and the Spurs game he sucked, then fair enough. It'll give me more information, but I don't have that to my knowledge. So I'll leave that up to you guys if you do decide to bet on Ben Simmons in this game. Let's jump into the next one. It's the Milwaukee Bucks versus the Miami Heat. In terms of this, let me just quickly check the lineups. Duncan Robinson's a game time decision. Jimmy Butler is still out. Rozier is out. Josh Richardson is out. And Chris Middleton is out for the Milwaukee Bucks. So we're having a look at Bam Adebayo firstly. We'll check out his points prop because his line is at 23.5, right? He's gone under this line 10 straight games. In terms of the matchup, the Milwaukee Bucks allow the 4th most points to centers. So Bam's points line is high for probably 2 reasons. The matchup is excellent, and the Miami Heat are missing a fair few scorers. Jimmy Butler's out, Richardson's a spark plug off the bench, and Terry Rozier has been taking quite a few shots. So you can probably expect Bam and Tyler Hero to see some pretty elevated lines. They'll see increased usage rates, so there's a good chance there. But looking at head-to-head matchups, in his last 10 games against the Bucks, he's covered this line twice. In terms of activity, played on average 32.6 minutes. He averaged almost 18 shot attempts in those games. But what you can see, for a big man, he's got a lot of games under 50%. Looking at his last 10 games where he's gone under in every single one, he's shooting 52% from the field, 12.8 attempts per game. You really got to, download Outlier or log into Outlier, start your free trial, and then use this tool to have a look at how he plays when Jimmy Butler's out and how does he play when Josh Richardson is out, let Terry Rozier is out. Like, do your deep dives to figure out how he plays, how many minutes he's going to get. His last 8 games with those 3 players out, he still managed to go under, right? So It's not like just because those players are out, he's going to play better. He's still only taking 12.5 shots in those games. But once again, the matchup is great against the Milwaukee Bucks. And without all of those players, he hasn't played a game against the Milwaukee Bucks, right? So a few things you need to take into consideration for Bam Adebayo. But let's check out his rebounds prop. His rebound prop's at 10.5. The Bucks allow the 8th most rebounds to centers. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. And in head-to-head matchups, he's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. So, yeah, look, I'm a little bit hesitant on that one too. Where I think he could probably get active is around the assists. So the Bucks allow the 2nd most assists to centers. Adebayo is going to have a higher usage rate with all of these players out. We don't know if he's going to shoot the ball, but his usage rate is going to be high. He's very capable of racking up the assists. And you can see it here. He's hit this in only 5 out of his last 10 games. But when he does hit it, he's capable of 10. But if he doesn't, he's hit this in 1, right? So these are his games against the Milwaukee Bucks. Looking at his last 10 games, he's hit this in 2 out of his last 10. So you got to factor in how many assists does he get when, let's say just Jimmy's not here. Let's have a look at how his passing goes with Jimmy Butler out. We can see he's still only hit this in 3 out of his last 10. If you add Terry Rozier to the mix as well, what happens then? Let's go Josh Richardson, Terry Rozier, Adebayo, still only cover this in 2 out of his last 8. So, yeah, look, it's a difficult one. You can either do your research or just choose not to bet on Bam Adebayo props. I think that's where I'm going to land in this one. Let's have a look at Tyler Hero. Very similar to Bam. I think you'll see elevated lines and elevated lines, probably low hit rates, but the matchup's going to be, not the matchup, the usage rate's going to be a lot higher. So we can see in his last 10 games, Tyler Hero's only covered his points line of 23.5 twice. They just happen to be his last 2 games. Now, Tyler Hero is going to be starting at point guard in this game, right? So in terms of point guards, the matchup for the Bucks is a great one. They allow the 2nd most points to point guards. If it's shooting guards, they allow the 6th most points. So the matchup for Tyler Hero is going to be a somewhat easy one in terms of scoring the ball. What I'd be interested to know is in these games, did we see a change in his shot attempts? So he's averaging 15.6. He took 15 against the Spurs and 21 against the Boston Celtics. He has fouled 22.5 points in 7 of his last 8 games on the road. But once again, there's a lot of scorers out for them. So he probably does go over given the easy matchup, increased opportunities, volumes, and all that type of shit. But yeah, the data's just not strong enough for me to want to take that, to be honest. Looking at his assist prop, though, that line's at 5.5. The Bucks allow the 8th fewest assists to point guards, but 17th, ranking 17th against shooting guards. That's quite inconsistent. He's hit this in 3 out of his last 10. He's gone under in 3 straight games against the Milwaukee Bucks. Points-wise against the Bucks, scored 35 in their most recent matchup in October, but has gone under in them as well. So, yeah, I'm not really feeling this game, if I'm being honest with you. Just having a look at the players that are available. I'm not getting too aroused here. But look at Jaime Jaquez Jr. real quick, because he will also see an uplift in his usage rate. Playing small forward, in terms of that, the Bucks allow the 14th fewest points to small forwards. In his last 10 games, he's only covered this twice, but he's only playing between 23 to 28 minutes. I think given the injuries they have, he probably plays close to 35 minutes. So if we wanted to fuck around with Jaime Jaquez and have a look to see what he could do in 30-plus minutes, right? These are his last 10 games where he's played more than 30 minutes. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games. So that could be somewhat arousing for you. This matchup against the Bucks, he scored 14 points and he covered this line. He played 32 minutes. He shot 7 from 9 from the field. So 9 shot attempts. I wouldn't confidently take his 13.5 if he's only going to shoot the ball 9 times. But that's just one example of how you could use outlier.bet, right? What if he doesn't play 30 minutes? Then this is an absolute fucking waste of time. But he is starting. They are missing some depth on their wings. Richardson, Rozier, Butler, Duncan Robinson is a game time decision. So they don't have many wing players available. If he plays more than 30 minutes, he hits this at an 80% hit rate. He's hit this in 80% of his last 20 games too. Check out that, right? 16 of his last 20 games where he's played more than 30 minutes, Jaime Jaquez has covered 13.5 points. So the Bucks, they are missing Chris Middleton. He's not the greatest defender in the world, obviously, but they do have Jay Crowder, somewhat good defensive player, I assume, at this age, at this point in his career, perhaps. But yeah, that's one way that you could use it. I'm not saying to take the bet because I'm not 100% sure he's going to play 30 minutes. It makes sense that he does, but look, if he smashes this line, I'll be looking back at him like, fuck, I knew it.
I did, I did the numbers. If he plays more than 30 minutes and he cashes this, I'll kick myself in the face. I probably won't record myself doing it, but the kick shall be had. All right. But let's have a look at the players for the Bucks. Now, Brook Lopez. This man could be a money maker if he's got the right matchup, but he doesn't have it today. Having a look here, in terms of his points, his line's at 11.5. The Miami Heat allow the second fewest points to centers on the season. Brook Lopez has covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And against the Bucks, the Heat, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 11. So 12 points in his most recent matchup, 12, 11, 18, 36 this calendar year. But yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant on that. 11.5, he definitely could cover it, right? Let's have a look to see what he's like at home. Last 10 home games for Brook Lopez, he's covered in 5 of 10. So that doesn't give me too much confidence either. Brook Lopez, one of those players that tends to do most of his scoring in the first quarter, I believe. So if we check his first quarter numbers, oh yeah, check that out. His line's at 3.5. It's plus 105. So it's plus money here. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games. So that's got to get you a little bit aroused. Head-to-head matchups, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 11 games against the Miami Heat. In those games, he averaged 8.7 minutes in the first quarter. In his last 10 games, he's averaging 9.4 minutes. So he's definitely going to be on the court. I don't know how many shots he's taking in this one, but he'll be on the court and he only needs to make 2 buckets. Could be a tip-in, could be some free throws. He takes 3-pointers too, right? So I know the matchup is difficult, which means over the course of a game, he probably would be slowed down. But you're looking at Brook Lopez, first quarter points. He only needs 2 buckets. He's covered in 8 of his last 10. He's covered it in 6 straight. God damn. I'm talking myself into this one. So if this is still at plus money by the time I finish recording this video, I might take it. I'm talking myself into it. The matchup is difficult. I get that. But you're going to have Giannis banging down the paint. You're going to have Dame with his laser out from deep. I think there's a chance here. Brook Lopez. Over 3.5 points in the first quarter. Get the fuck out of here. Let's do it. God, I talked myself into it. Let's have a look at Dame Lillard real quick. His points line, it's at 24.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The matchup against the Miami Heat, it's a difficult one. They allow the 7th fewest points to point guards on the season. In head-to-head matchups, Dame, he's covered this in his last 2 games against the Miami Heat. Both of these games, he was playing for the Milwaukee Bucks. So he has scored well against them this year. 2 games he's gone over. He's been a bit inconsistent in his last 5-10. In his last 10 games, covering it only 5 times. Looking at his last 10 home games, he's covered that 5 out of his last 10 games. So, look, if the Miami Heat are going to be playing Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson in their backcourt, neither of them are very good defensively. So, even though on the season, 7th fewest points to point guards, I wouldn't be too worried about that, given who the Miami Heat are going to have out there. Shooting guards, an even easier matchup. So, Dame Lillard to go over, I don't mind it, but I'm not as excited as I am about the Brook Lopez play. I've got to tell you. Let's check Dame's assists out. The line's at 6.5. The Miami Heat are the 19th fewest assists to point guards. So pretty much middle of the road. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. And he went 4 and then 9 in his 2 games against the Miami Heat this season. So, yeah, that leaves me a little bit tentative. Maybe you want to look at a 3-point prop. His line's at 3.5. You can get that for plus money. The Miami Heat allow the 9th most 3-pointers to point guards. Unfortunately, Dame's only hit this in 1 out of his last 10, and he's only hit this in 3 of his last 20 games. My God, what a drop-off. In 2022, he hit this in 53% of the games that he played. So, definitely in poor shooting form. The matchup is good. The odds are great. But, yeah, Dame for 3.5. Not feeling you, my boy. Let's have a look at Giannis. So his points line's at 29.5. The matchup, Miami Heat allow the 13th fewest points to power forwards. In his last 10 games, he's covered this line in 5 of them. He scored 36 points in his last matchup against the Denver Nuggets. Against the Miami Heat, he's covered this in 4 out of his last 7. He has hit this in 3 consecutive games against them. Looking at his last 10 games at home, we can see Giannis has covered this in 4 out of his last 10. So nothing amazing screaming out to me there. So, yeah, Giannis, I'm a little bit hesitant to take his prop, 29.5. It is on the lower end of what you'd normally see for Giannis, but Miami is a somewhat decent defensive team, right? So, That I'm not sure about. Assist-wise, his line's at 6.5. The Miami Heat allow the 10th most assists to power forwards. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. And against the Miami Heat, he's hit this in 2 of his last 7. He's gone under in his last 3. So I'm not a big fan of that one either. Rebound-wise, his line's at 11.5. He's hit this in 2 out of his last 7 against the Heat. And he's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. So in my last video up against the Denver Nuggets, I said if I was going to take a prop for Giannis, it would definitely be the overs in his boards. And he killed it. 18 rebounds. But there was something in the data. There was something in the matchup. There was something in the historical form which told me lean the over for his boards, right? In this particular game against the Miami Heat, I'm not liking any of his props. And I'm not saying to take them as under because I don't even like that. I just want to stay away. Far too inconsistent. Miami have too many movements in their roster. So I'm going to choose to pass. I think the only one, if I do play a bet in this game, it's going to be Brook Lopez over 3.5 points in the first quarter. But that's only if it's plus money by the time I finish recording this. So check the pinned comments and you shall see. The next game, it's the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Portland Trail Blazers. So the Portland Trail Blazers, they got game time decisions all over the place every single night. Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, Duop Reith, Brogdon is out. So, you know, they haven't been able to put the same starting 5 together on a consistent basis. The line for this one, the spread's only 8.5 points. So there's a chance the Minnesota Timberwolves can blow them out, but I'd be willing to take a bet here. So I want to start off with a pick that I do like, and I've already taken this one, right? So I want to look at Mike Conley. You think of Mike Conley, you might think of his points, right? But you probably wouldn't. You might think of his assists, right? He's a point guard. He's a floor general. The matchup is decent, right? Against point guards, they allow the 10th most assists to point guards. His line's at 6.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10. He's hit this in 5 consecutive games. In his last matchup against the Portland Trail Blazers, he had 10 assists. The game prior, he had 6. I like that. I think that's a good pick. But what I do like even more is his rebounds prop. Check this out. Mike Conley, right? You know what? I love plus money here, right? I'm not going to be betting like minus 140s or like 130s and say, yeah, it was 1 from 1 on my picks, all right? Because if you got to generate profit with these things. So his line is 2.5. You're getting plus money for this one. I got it for $2.50. On here you can see plus 145. I don't know what the translation is there, but it's plus money regardless. Now he's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games, which is fabulous, right? The matchup, Portland Trail Blazers allow the 10th most rebounds to point guard. So the matchup is pretty decent. And in head-to-head matchups, last 2 games against the Blazers, he's covered this side with 4 rebounds in both of them. So I do like what he's done recently. He's shown us that he can get 5. He's hit that in 2 out of his last 10. He can definitely get the 3, right? 8 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is okay. The odds are fantastic. It's plus money. To let you know, I did also take him for 5 rebounds. I put like half a unit. So I put 2 units on all my single bets, but I put half a unit on this high value one. And that's for Mike Conley to get 5 rebounds or more. I got that for $8.50, which is plus $7.50 for those of you in the US. But yeah, I think that's an interesting one and it's good value, right? It's plus money for something that he's done in 8 out of his last 10 where he's got a good matchup. Tell me I'm fucking stupid because I can't figure out why the odds are so good. Back-to-back? Perhaps. But I checked his back-to-back games. He's still playing 30 minutes in those games, and he's actually covered his rebound line well in those games too. So I'm not overly concerned with that. The other player I want to look at is Rudy Gobert, and I have taken a bet on Rudy Gobert. So let's go through him. Firstly, his points prop is at 14.5, and you can get this at plus money right now. Plus 100. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is great. The Trailblazers allow the 6th most points to centers on the season. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 4 out of his last 5 games, Rudy Gobert. So I do love his points prop. It is at plus money, so I don't mind that at all. Looking at his rebound prop, though, his line's at 12.5. The Portland Trailblazers allow the 10th most rebounds to centers on the season. His head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 3 out of his last 5. Most recently, 17 rebounds against the Portland Trailblazers. So I do like both his rebounds and his points prop. Points prop, we're getting plus money for it, though. And he has been hitting that quite well. The matchup is excellent. But what I did ultimately land on was his points plus rebounds. He still hit that in 7 of his last 10, but his more recent form is excellent. So if you just looked at his rebounds, recent form is he went under in his rebounds prop. in his last 2 games. If you just looked at his points prop, he's covered that in 4 out of his last 5. But if you look at his points and his rebounds prop, he's covered that in 5 straight. Plus, he's covered that in 4 out of his last 5 games against the Portland Trail Blazers. He had 24 points and 17 rebounds the last time they matched up. So I ultimately ended on that. I took him for over 26.5. But I think points or rebound, points probably lean a little bit towards points because he hit that at a little bit better rate and the matchup is a little bit better. But I ultimately decided on points and rebounds. But it's up to you what you end up on. If we're going to stick with the Minnesota Timberwolves players, let's talk through Karl Anthony Towns, see what the fuck's going on with this guy. High-pitched voice motherfucker. His points prop, it's at 22.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The matchup, 12th fewest points to power forwards the Portland Trail Blazers allow. So he's a bit inconsistent. 23 points in his last game against Portland. But yeah, I'm not convinced. I don't like betting on Karl Anthony Towns ever, to be honest. I'm just not a big fan of his. Unfortunately, I'm biased, so sorry. Rebounds, he's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. He's gone under in 3 straight, but he has rebounded well in his last 2 games against the Portland Trail Blazers. And looking at his assist, his line's at 2.5. The Blazers do allow the 7th most assists to power forwards. He's also hit this in 7 out of his last 10, but he only had 1 assist in his last game against the Portland Trail Blazers. So there's nothing on this prop screen for Cat to tell me to back him. Anthony Edwards, perhaps, but he's somewhat inconsistent as well. His points props at 25.5. In terms of the matchup, the Trail Blazers allow the most points to shooting guards on the season. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. In his last 5 games against the Portland Trail Blazers, he's covered this 3 out of his last 5. He only scored 9 points in his last matchup against Portland. He still played 27 minutes. But yeah, the matchup is excellent, right? Most points allowed to shooting guards. Anthony Edwards is nothing but a shooting guard, but he's still inconsistent, right? Scored 9 points against Dallas, scored 9 points in his last matchup against Portland. So I'm still a little bit hesitant to take that. Looking at his assist prop, though, line's at 5.5. The Trailblazers allow the 6th most assists to shooting guards. He's hit this in 3 out of his last 10 games. And against the Blazers, he's hit this in his last 2, and he's covered in 3 of his last 5. Rebounds-wise, he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. The Trailblazers allow the 2nd most rebounds to shooting guards. And in his head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 3 out of his last 5. So, yeah. Look, I'm not feeling it. The matchup is excellent for Anthony Edwards, right? But he just doesn't hit his lines inconsistent enough for me to take. If we check his PRA, you can see that the matchup is great for points, rebounds, and assists. Yeah. An argument that could be made to take the over is he's hit this in 4 consecutive games now. Houston, Chicago, Milwaukee, and the Clippers. So my man is filling up the stat sheet. Why I would also take it is this game against the Trailblazers is obviously an anomaly. Yes. Anomaly. It's 9 points, 6 assists, and 3 rebounds. He only played 27 minutes. The Timberwolves blew them out by 20-something points, right? Prior matchups, he's going to work on them, right? Covering in 3 of the previous 4. So Anthony Edwards definitely could get it done. And if I was going to take a prop for Anthony Edwards, it probably would just be his PRA. Looking to fill up the stat sheet because looking at his PRA, in his last 10 games, you'll usually find that if he's going to cover his PRA, he's going to do everything. He's going to score a shit ton of points anyway. If he doesn't cover his PRA, you can see that in all of these games, there's only one game in his last 10 where he would have covered his points and fallen under this PRA. All the other ones, he went under his points, he went under in his rebounds and his assists anyway. So I think PRA is the safest bet to take this Anthony Edwards one. Very capable of filling up the stat sheet in other ways. 7 boards, 8 assists, 9 assists, 12 rebounds, right? So, yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant, but that's probably another good pick on this game. Let's have a look at Jeremy Grant. We'll just look at his points prop in this one because he doesn't do much of anything else. We can see he's covered his points prop in 5 of his last 10, but 4 out of his last 5. In terms of the matchup against the Minnesota Timberwolves, they allow the 11th fewest points to power forwards on the season. And in head-to-head matchups, scored 13 points in his last game against the Wolves, 26 in the game prior to that. So, yeah. Look, that was a 20-point blowout. Unless you think it's going to happen again, you can probably take the unders. But his recent form is great, Jeremy Grant. Looking at Anthony Simons, his points props at 21.5. we can see that he's hit this in 4 consecutive games now. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. In terms of the matchup, I think he will play shooting guard, but the Timberwolves, they allow the fewest points to shooting guards on the season. So the matchup's going to be tough. Head-to-head matchups, he's struggled against the Timberwolves. He's gone under in 3 straight. Only scored 5 points in that last matchup against them where there was a blowout. He played 28 minutes in that game. He shot 0 for 10. So he got absolutely clamped up. So the Minnesota Timberwolves, they've got some great defenders. Obviously, Rudy Gobert protecting the rim. Karl-Anthony Towns, not the worst shot blocker in the world. But Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards, they're animals on the perimeter, right? So, to be honest, I'd be leaning the under. But his recent form is great. You'd be a psychopath to take the under on this. And I'm just not that crazy. For me, in this game, obviously, Rudy Gobert I like. And Mike Conley to get some boards. Hopefully they deliver on that. Let's talk about the Sacramento Kings against the Phoenix Suns. There's no major outs or game time decisions in this one, so we've got a lot of props to really look through. We'll start with the Sacramento Kings, though. We'll start with Malik Monk. It's rare that we see his props available this far out from a game. Points-wise, his line's at 16.5. He's covered this in 5 consecutive games. Phoenix Suns, they allow the 13th fewest points to shooting guards. He's actually covered this in 6 consecutive games. And what's changed in the last 6? His minutes have gone up in his last 6 games, somewhat. Field goal attempts have gone up in his last 6 games. So that's probably a new form line that we can really look at. His last 6, he's at lows of 18. So the line set at 16.5. Matchup, somewhat difficult. But at the same time, it's not bad. His recent form is pretty rousing. Head-to-head matchups against the Phoenix Suns, 13-7, 13-8, 18-30. So in that most recent game, he took 16 shots. Fortunately, only made 5. So he shot pretty poorly. And that was back in January. And if we were to look into what was happening in January, that's a little bit messy. If we look back to his last 20 games, we can see. So this is the game against the Phoenix Suns. He just was off the back of a great game against the Milwaukee Bucks. 1 day's rest, and then he had this pretty poor stretch between the 17th of January and the start of Feb. As soon as the 3rd of February hit, he's been on this new streak of his. So through this shit patch that he went through, right? He shot 5 of 16 against the Phoenix Suns. Then he shot less than 10 times in 6 consecutive games. Got his mojo back against the Indiana Pacers, and your boy's been shooting. Look at those shot attempts. 14 to 12, 21, 13, and then 20 shots. So his line's at 16.5, and right now, I feel like taking it. But is there any reason Malik Monk stopped shooting? There's no reason for me. I can't see it. So I don't mind that. He'll be coming off the bench, but he's going to play his minutes, right? Comes off the bench anyway, playing very decent minutes here, Malik Monk. So I don't mind that. I want to have a quick look at his assists. Assist prop, his line's at 5.5. The matchup's good. The Suns allow the 6th most assists to shooting guards. He's covered this in 10 out of his last 20, but only 4 out of his last 10. This last 6-game stretch, he's playing a lot more minutes, clearly scoring a lot more, but might be a difficult night. It's just too inconsistent. The matchup is good, but I think he'll prioritize scoring over distributing the ball. Want to have a quick look at his 3-point line, and it's 2.5. He's only hit that in his last 2 games. So looking at his attempts, though, last 3 games, he's been putting it up, but yeah, nothing screaming out to me there. But I don't mind Malik Monk for points in this one, so keep your eye on that. Let's check De'Aaron Fox. His points line is at 23.5. You can get plus money at 24.5. In terms of his recent form, though, hasn't been great. So whilst Malik Monk has been playing better, De'Aaron Fox has been playing pretty poorly. Offensively, that is, not scoring. In terms of the matchup, the Suns allow the 9th most points to point guards on the season. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. And in his matchups against the Phoenix Suns, did score 33 points against them in January. So he can get it done. He just hasn't been doing it lately. His minutes are slightly down. Field goals, he's still taking the shots, right? 17, 15, 14. But he's had 4 consecutive games now shooting under 50% from the field. So slightly out of form, I would say. Looking at his assists, the line's at 4.5. The Suns mid-tier when it comes to assists allowed to point guards. He has hit this in 3 consecutive games, though, hopefully passing it to Malik Monk. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 3 consecutive games. So, yeah, I don't mind this 4.5 though. The odds -138. Too much juice for me, and I'm not a juice guy. Give me that H2O. Let's have a look at Domantas Sabonis. So here's points prop. That's at 19.5, potentially 20.5. No, it's 19.5. Now, we can see in his last 10 games, he's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. In terms of the matchup, the Suns allow the 8th fewest points to centers on the season. So it's a somewhat difficult one. In head-to-head matchups, he has covered this in 2 consecutive games against the Phoenix Suns with 28 and 21 points. So he might be one of those players where we say, fuck the matchup, I'm taking you anyway, my boy. But look, I think pass of the ball, has been doing a great job of that. The Suns allow the 12th most assists to centers on the season. He just had 14 assists against the OKC Thunder. And I think we actually bet on him to go over in rebounds and assists, and he cleared that quite easily in that game. So let's have a look at his assist prop here. 6 out of his last 10. He's got 10 plus assists in 2 consecutive games against the Phoenix Suns. One of those were at home. The other was on the road. So he's got it done against them before. The matchup isn't too difficult. Don't mind that for Domantas Sabonis. Looking at his rebound, the line's at 8.5 -135. So I'm not a big fan of that. Rebounds, 13.5 +100. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The Suns allow the 3rd fewest rebounds to centers on the season. And he's got under in his last 2 games against the Phoenix Suns. So, yeah, probably lean to the under when it comes to rebounds. Points, I'm not sure of. Assists, I do lean to the over. But at 8.5 odds, I'm not a fan of that. If you did want to look at over 9.5, you're getting +125. And yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant. But look, he's hit the 9.5 anyway, right? Whether you played at 8.5 or 9.5, it wouldn't have made a difference looking at his last 10 games. If we looked at his last 20 games, whether you played at 8.5 or 9.5, it doesn't make a difference because there's no instances where he finishes on 9 assists. So, my advice, we're looking at the Domantas Sabonis assists, take him for 10. So based off the analysis here, take him for 10, and if he finishes on 9, look, I'll probably kick myself in the face again, but I'm not sold on taking the over. I'm just saying if you are going to take it, take that 9.5. Get those extra odds because he doesn't finish on 9 assists by the looks of things. So check the pin comment at the end. I'll decide whether I do take Sabonis. There are other plus money players out there that I'm already considering. Who else is there? Keegan Murray. I know a lot of people like betting on Keegan Murray, but I personally don't. He's too inconsistent for me. Looking at his last 10 games. So his line's at 13.5. Phoenix Suns, they allow the 7th most points to power forwards on the season. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. This is a road game. So on the road, I don't believe he's been playing quite well. Yeah, it's not too bad. 4 out of his last 10, but he's gone under in 4 straight home games. So, yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant to touch anything to do with Keegan Murray. Head-to-head matchups. He has covered this in 2 straight games against the Phoenix Suns, though. So that is somewhat positive. But the recent form, that just it throws me off, right? I don't like this. I don't like this. Is too much red for me. So Keegan Murray, I'm not a big fan of. Looking at the Phoenix Suns players, though, we'll start with Bradley Beal. His point line's at 19.5. In terms of the matchup, the Sacramento Kings allow the 3rd most points to shooting guards on the season. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games, 3 out of his last 4. Played 1 game against the Kings earlier this season. He only scored 13 points. He shot 6 from 14 from the field, 0 from 4 from deep. So I'm not really feeling the points prop there for Bradley Beal. Assists and rebounds might be able to fuck with that, but let's have a look. The Kings allow the 12th fewest assists to shooting guards. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10, and he only had 5 assists against them last time. Rebound-wise, the Kings allow the fewest rebounds to shooting guards on the season. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10, and he only had 3 rebounds against the Kings. So, yeah, I wouldn't say take the under, but there's nothing in terms of the over that I do like about Bradley Beal. Let's have a look at Kevin Durant. His points line is at 26.5. He has covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games. He has been covering it better more recently. In terms of the matchup, the Kings allow the 6th most points to power forwards on the season. In head-to-head matchups, Kevin Durant has covered this line in his last 2 games against the Sacramento Kings, wearing a Phoenix Suns jersey. In those games, averaging 36 minutes and only 15 shot attempts. So super efficient. He was getting to the line very well on an average 9 times per game. He He also shot his threes at 58% clip. Now, looking at his last 5 games, he's covered this 3 out of the 5. He's averaging 20 shot attempts per game, which is much higher than the 2 games against the Sacramento Kings. Hasn't been getting to the free throw line very well, but more field goal attempts, and he's been shooting them quite well. 58% from the field, 47% from deep. So I don't mind this for Kevin Durant. I don't mind his points prop at all. So let's have a look at his assist prop. Line is at 5.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. Sacramento Kings are now the second most assists to power forwards on the season, and he's gone under in his last 2 games against them. Rebound-wise, his line's at 6.5. He covered it once and went under in the next game against the Kings. In his last 10, he's covered this in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup, not good nor bad. So with KD, he's been playing quite well. I do like his points prop, to be honest. But looking at his PRA, he's actually covered this in 5 out of his last 6 games, which is very interesting. In the head-to-head matchup, he did go under in both. So his rebounds and assists were somewhat low, but points-wise, he's been excellent. So his recent form has been good, but yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence. He does have a good matchup for points and assists, and he has been scoring and passing the ball quite well lately. So yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant. But he has been rebounding the ball quite well too. So I think that's why I would look at the whole PRA picture here. I'm a bit on the fence for KD, but that is one of the latest games in the slate, so I'll probably have a bit more time to make a decision on that. Let's have a look at D-Book. His point line's at 29.5. The Kings, mid-tier when it comes to the matchup in points allowed. D-Book has hit this in his last 2. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. In the matchups against the Kings, he's covered this in 3 out of his last 7, but he has gone under in his last 3 games against them. Assist-wise, the Kings allow the 6th most assists to point guards. He's covered this in 4 of his last 7. He's covered this in 3 straight games against the Sacramento Kings. In his last 10 games, he's only covered this in 4 out of his last 10. So I haven't bet on D-Book for a very long time, and this is why, right? All of his numbers are all over the place. Rebound-wise, the matchup is good, but he's only hit this in 4 out of his last 10. He's gone under in his last 2 games against the Sacramento Kings. So, look, very good player. Quite inconsistent, though. D-Book, not a fan of betting on your brother. Jumping into the last game on the slate, it's the Detroit Pistons versus the Los Angeles Lakers. And as always, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, their game time decisions. The Lakers do have a lot of outs, though. For the Detroit Pistons, Stewart is out, but Quinn and Grimes, Fournier, Malachi Flynn, all game time decisions for this one. So I guess the main part is a lot of their main players will be playing. Line for this one is at a -11 for the Los Angeles Lakers. So there's, blowout risk here. But let's get through it because there's a few players that I do have my eye on. But there are also reasons why I haven't pulled the trigger, and I'll explain that. Firstly, Jaden Ivey. His point line's at 21.5. The Lakers, mid-tier, the 16th most points to shooting guards. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10, but he's covered it in 4 out of his last 5, really. So his recent form is great. Head-to-head matchup, has struggled against the Los Angeles Lakers, going under in 3 straight. Did verse them once this season. So this is in the end of November. But in that game, he only played 18 minutes. So he would have been playing off the bench. He's playing starter minutes now, so he does have more opportunity. If he does play, is Austin Reeves going to pick him up or Cade Cunningham? Either way, Austin Reeves not a great defender. Ivy probably a bit more aggressive attacking the rim compared to Cade Cunningham. So I don't mind this, but it's based really on his recent form, his new opportunity, because he's playing 38 minutes in his last 5 and he's attempting 19 shot attempts per game. He's got over 20 shot attempts in 3 consecutive games. If this guy shoots the ball more than 20 times, how does he not cover the 21.5 points? So the Lakers not the greatest defensive team out there. So I don't mind this for Jaden Ivey. So I'm on the fence. Looking at his assists, the Lakers allow the 17th fewest assists to shooting guards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. So that's not real compelling for me. But Jaden Ivey points, I'm a little bit hesitant on that one, but I don't mind it. Looking at Cade Cunningham, his points props at 21.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup, the Lakers allow the 9th most points to point guards on the season. He's hit this in his last 2 games, though. Head-to-head matchups, he only scored 15 points in his last matchup against the Los Angeles Lakers. So the matchup is decent. He's playing the minutes, but he's shooting less than Jaden Ivey, right? So he's shooting less than Jaden Ivey. He's got the same line, though, 21.5. So I'd probably lean on Ivey to cover, more likely than Cade Cunningham on volume alone. And Cade Cunningham also shoots a worse percentage. So definitely Ivey I'm leaning towards. Cade Cunningham is the key distributor in this team, though. Assist props at 7.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The Lakers allow the 12th fewest assists to point guards. In his last matchup, he only had 5 assists against the Lakers. So bit up and down. The matchup's not strong. The historical form's not strong either. I'm not fucking with this one. Rebound-wise, line's at 3.5. The Lakers do allow the 7th most rebounds to point guards, though. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. And even though the Lakers blew the Pistons out by 26 points, he still had 4 rebounds against them. 3.5, that's not the worst line here. He hit this at 75% rate in 2022. He's not rebounding the same way. Jalen Duren, Thompson get a lot of boards. 3.5 might be something I'm willing to play for Cade Cunningham. Sticking with the Pistons players, though, Asar Thompson, he's back in the starting lineup, which is great to see. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 10 games. Looking at his minutes, I'd probably say his last 5 games is what I'd be paying more attention to. So looking at his last 5, he's covered this in 3 out of his last 5. In terms of points, the Lakers are mid. Asar Thompson, if LeBron does play, he's going to have to pick LeBron up. So I don't know how it impacts his stats, but looking at his boards, in his last 5, he's covered this in 3 out of the 5 games. Lakers, somewhat decent matchup, but yeah, I'm not feeling the Asar Thompson props right now. And who else is there? Jalen Duren. Let's have a look at Jalen Duren. Might be up against AD if AD does play. Points prop is at 14.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup, the Lakers rank 15th in points allowed to centers, so it's not an easy one or a hard one. In head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in 3 consecutive games against the Lakers. So not a big fan of that one. For Jalen Duren, rebound-wise, his line is at 11.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. But check these last 3 games out. 15, 22, and 18. He's got an excellent matchup. The Lakers are now the 5th most rebounds to centers on the season. So good matchup for Jalen Duren. He's only hit this in 1 of his last 3, I believe. That's right. So 8, 13, and 7. That last matchup against the Lakers, he only played 17 minutes, though. So he's pulled off 13 rebounds in 23 minutes against the Lakers before. If we look at his last 10 games, what type of minutes are we looking at? 32 minutes per game, playing big minutes in his last 3. So I don't mind this. Over 11.5 rebounds for Jalen Duren. Recent form is excellent. The matchup is good. He's hit 13 rebounds against the Lakers, playing less minutes than what he currently does. Jalen Duren can stay on the court for this long. I don't mind this. Let's quickly check his form on the road, though. Might be a home thing. No, last 3 games, they were on the road too. So he's absolutely been a beast on the road. Jalen Duren, over rebounds, lock it in. I'm going to check my sports book real quick. Actually, I'll do it after the video. We're almost done. But I do like Jalen Duren to get some boards. Looking at the Los Angeles Lakers. I'll start with Anthony Davis, though. His points prop is at 24.5. In terms of the matchup, the Pistons allow the 10th most points to centers on the season. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. He's gone over in 3 consecutive games against the Detroit Pistons. So he has been killing them lately. Anthony Davis. So he has been a bit inconsistent, but he murders the Pistons. So take that as you wish. Look, I don't like betting on AD a lot of the time. Purely this game time decision. He's got problems with his hips and his back and his ankle and his eyebrow. I don't know what's wrong with him. But assists, sometimes I do back his assist prop, though, because there could be a lot of value in it, right? He's got a triple-double not too long ago. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The Pistons allow the 8th most assists to centers. He's covered this in his last 2 games against the Detroit Pistons. So 4 assists, probably a lot safer, I'd say, but, I'm not too sure. It's AD. Rebound-wise, his line's at 11.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The Pistons allow the 13th fewest rebounds to centers. He has rebounded extremely well against Detroit. 16, 15, and 16 boards. So his points, he's been killing them. Rebounds, he's been killing them. And he's had 2 games with great assist numbers against the Detroit Pistons. Do you just take his PRA? The line's at 39.5. He's had 56, 56, and then most recently at the end of November, 48 PRA against them, where he had 28 points, 16 rebounds, and 4 assists. He went over in every single one. Looking at his last 10 games, he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. I don't mind it for AD, but obviously it's a game time decision, right? So that makes me a little bit cautious because if he doesn't play, we just burnt our money. Well, you get it back, but, you know, you put a bet on, you try to limit your bets in the same game, and if you bet on AD, then he doesn't rock up, then it could screw you, depending on how you play your bets. Let's have a look at LeBron James. His line's at 24.5. I haven't bet on LeBron for quite some time. The matchup, though, the Pistons allow the 5th most points to small forwards. LeBron's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Against the Pistons, he scored 35 and 25 in his last 2. Looking at his assists, he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Just had 14 assists in his last game, which is pretty crazy. Head-to-head matchups against the Pistons, he's gone under in his last 2. Rebound-wise, he's had 8 rebounds the last matchup against the Pistons. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games. So the only prop that I'd even consider betting on LeBron James right now is this. It's his 3-pointers made. Line's at 1.5. He's hit this in 9 of his last 10 games. And the Detroit Pistons allow the 8th most 3-pointers made to small forwards. But again, the odds, -120. It's a little bit juiced for me. I think he still hits it, to be honest. But I wouldn't be willing to put big money on just this. But yeah, I think this is a great pick. Don't get me wrong. LeBron James to cover that. But at those odds, it's not something that I'm willing to play. Now, Austin Reeves and D'Lo, they've got some very interesting things here. So this is one of the props that I wanted to talk through. I was strongly considering taking it, but then I didn't. So firstly, looking at his points prop, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. The line's at 19.5. The matchup is great. The Pistons allow the 7th most points to point guards on the season. In head-to-head matchups, D'Lo scored 35 points in his last game against the Pistons. So all signs point to yes. If you look at his assist numbers, very similar. He only hit this in 4 out of his last 10, but in his last game against the Pistons, he had 9 assists. So he milked them in points and assists. Those are the two. That was the play I was looking at. He's over in points and assists. His line's at 24.5. He had 44 in his last game against them. And in his last 10, he's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games. But I didn't take this bet because Spencer Dinwiddie, he's just signed with the Lakers. He just practiced with him. I couldn't find any word on whether he was going to be playing or not. So if you have some insight, if Spencer Dinwiddie does not play, then take this play for D'Lo every day of the week. Points plus assists against the Pistons. But if Spencer does play, does that eat into the minutes for D'Lo? Potentially. We don't know what's happening with LeBron and AD. So I was just a little bit uncertain, but I do love this. This would have been my favorite pick from this game, if I'm being honest with you. D'Lo points and assists, but the Spencer Dinwiddie thing got me a little bit fucked up. Looking at Austin Reeves, his points line's at 16.5. How the Pistons defend shooting guards, it's not too bad. He's hit this in 6 of his last 10 games, though, but he's gone under in 3 straight games against the Detroit Pistons. Assist-wise, he's gone under in 2 of his last 3, and he's gone over in 6 out of his last 10, but the Pistons allow the 3rd fewest assists to shooting guards. So, yeah, matchup's a little bit how you're going. Austin Reeves, look, he could be impacted by Spencer Dinwiddie as well. I did check the depth chart for the Lakers, and they're pretty much running a 4-man rotation in their backcourt. D'Lo, Austin Reeves, Skylar May, and now Spencer Dinwiddie. So I think all these guys will get their opportunities and their minutes. But yeah, look, if D'Lo goes out and kills it, another reason to kick myself in the face. But if he doesn't, then I'll be able to say I was right. But yeah, that's pretty much it for that one. So that's a wrap on the preview of the 6-game slate. A very lengthy one, so I hope you guys appreciated that. If you did, smash that like button, sub to the channel if you haven't, because your boy is getting busy. A reminder, 7-day free trial for Outlier. Link in the description box below. Best of luck. I hope the gambling gods are on our side. I'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.
It's all free. You don't even have to pay me.